Hello and welcome to another episode of The Brothers Discuss. I am Alex.
And I'm Chris.
Well, there's a couple of things going on in the world at the moment. One of those things is affecting what we talk about, and it's the new writer's strike. This is the first one we've had for some time. The last one was back in 2007. Do you remember that one, Chris?
I mean, not really all that much. I know like some of the things that had where there was some aftermath involved, but yeah. So you can take it away on this one, really.
So I don't think I knew much about it at the time. I think I started hearing about it when the films that were affected started coming out, and I've got a list of those films here, which we'll get into talking about some of those specifically. But I remember when like X-Men Origins Wolverine, because that was a film I was following behind the behind the scenes pretty closely, obviously, and hearing a writer's strike when I was like 12 doesn't mean that much to me at that age, or knowing how long that goes for or who it affects and what they can and can't do when filming these shows and films. Whereas now, hearing how many productions are halted and hearing how many writers are involved in the strike, it's going to be very interesting to see if this has the same effect. And I thought, before we're talking about some of the movies, are there any shows that in hindsight that you can think of that were affected by the original strike?
Really, the only one that I knew was the Office season 4, because I know that one was supposed to be like 20 something episodes and ended up being like just under 20. So
Yeah, it was originally slated for 30 episodes, and then it was
yeah.
like cut in half basically. And then the other being notably was the first season of Breaking Bad. That suffered from the writer's strike. There was as a result of that, the first season is significantly shorter than any of the other seasons. And yeah, the other big one for me personally is the show Heroes, where the first season of that show is stellar. It's essentially like the X-Men show that I've always wanted to see. And it just never was the same show after that, unfortunately, because of the writer's strike with what happened the next season. I should say when we talk about this, what the writers are asking for is totally fair. So when I say like this movie sucks or this movie wasn't as good or something got halted, that's besides the point. Now, with streaming and all these sorts of things like royalties, it's all over the place with how like the rules have changed without box office or DVD and Blu-ray sales and things like that. So when we talk about that, I'm not actually having a go at the writers. It's well within their right to strike, so good for them. And
Mhm.
I was thinking about how in 2007, this went into 2008, and a lot of films in 2009 were affected by this. But I also remember the Golden Globes didn't take place that year. Like I think they were just announced at a press conference, and maybe that was aired on TV. I can't
Mhm.
remember.
Interesting.
Yeah, you look back at that and go, wow, they canceled a whole award show and things like that. So like I said, I've got a list here of some movies that were greatly affected by this, notable ones. They're not in order of release or anything like that. I just have a list here. Let's just start with one of the biggest ones. Let's talk about X-Men Origins Wolverine. So, what can you tell me about this movie, Chris, from a writer's
Uh,
perspective?
well, knowing I actually didn't know, although that makes sense timeline wise about the writer strikes for this movie. But in hindsight, that makes a whole lot of sense.
So,
uh,
before that, like I just want to say I remember reading, because I did a lot of research on movie news at the time. Like there was a website called worstpreviews.com. That's where I used to get all of my movie news and announcements of trailers and casting and things like that. Like they would
mhm.
have articles all the time about X-Men Origins, and I remember reading a story about how Tom Rothman, I think he might have been the head of Fox at the time, about how they had sets painted a certain way, and then he came in and it was like, change this to make it more family friendly and things like that. So I think there is a darker rated version of this movie that exists on the pages somewhere. So all the continuity problems that this film started in terms of not being in line with certain things that were established in X-Men 2 specifically, with Wolverine's origins and the Weapon X stuff. Like, I don't know if those are due to the writer's strike or what, but that's one that had to halt production a lot. And it's one of the first times I heard they're going to do reshoots. That's one thing I remember for Wolverine was reshoots being a term that was used a lot and ever since, because that film is not very good. It's just kind of stuck with reshoots is a bad thing. It's not always a bad thing. Sometimes reshoots, it's just some pickup you got to do. It's not always the end of the world, but in this case, it kind of was.
Mm-hmm.
So X-Men Origins Wolverine has a super video gamey plot, and yet its video game, I believe, has a better story, which is strange and weird and ironic and all that. But yeah, there are aspects of the film that I really, really like. Like, I really like Liev Schreiber as Sabretooth. He's great.
For sure.
I like Gambit's role in the film as a guy who broke out of prison or a prison and takes Wolverine back to it. It's kind of an interesting way to introduce Gambit with a dark past, but everything with Silver Fox is just, it's just there. And some of the really emotional parts of the film just kind of fall flat for me, where everyone on the screen is acting their heart out. Hugh Jackman's really good in the film, but like, I mean, I like Danny Houston as Stryker, though. I mean, he's a very different Stryker to Brian Cox, but I like his performance. It's always good to see Danny Houston be a creep.
Yeah.
Any more thoughts on Origins Wolverine?
Yeah, not too much. All these years later, I think it kind of speaks for itself.
I mean, I'm sure like there's some people that enjoy it. It has some schlock value, I will say.
Yeah. I think that's the best part of the movie is just laughing at it so much, but
whether it's like the CG claws or like Wolverine like slicing that ladder.
Mm-hmm.
There's some good stuff in there. There's some good laughs. But with Origins Wolverine, it's kind of like it's an expected failure because there's always like comic movies at that point anyways weren't always proven successes. Like there were some really bad films that came out before that. So it's like, it's another bad comic movie. It's not the end of the world. But this next one is kind of a shocker in the system. And that is Quantum of Solace, the second Daniel Craig James Bond movie. So have you seen any of the Daniel Craig Bond movies?
I actually haven't. I've seen a little bit of Casino Royale.
Okay.
And that's literally it. So
oh, you got to hop on that train. Casino Royale is so good. But Quantum of Solace is not. So this one came out in late 2008. A couple of cultural significant moments for me are that Daniel Craig did an interview, I think when Skyfall came out, because there was a big gap between Quantum of Solace and Skyfall. 4 years, which is a long time for a Bond film, and No Time to Die broke that record. But when he was doing press for Skyfall, he said a line about how he had to write scenes for the film, and he said, "And a writer, I am not." That's just something that I quote every now and again, so that has stuck with me. But this is one to me where the plot, it's very clear they didn't have writers because the plot doesn't make sense. Things just kind of happen in the film. And a good example is M reprimands Bond, and she's like, take him out of here. Then Bond goes with those agents and beats them up and meets up with M again and is like, I'm going to go stop the bad guy. And she's like, well, good luck. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, moments like that happen, and you're like, wait, why were you just reprimanding him if you wanted him to do all of that? Like scenes don't make a lot of sense. Like, there's not a lot of continuity in the scenes, and it's just very, very dull, very boring. I mean, some of the action scenes are good, though. Like, but this is one of the more special effects-y looking of the Craig films, and it's a weird choice of director and just not a great script.
Yeah.
And the weird thing about this is that Quantum of Solace is one of the first Bond sequels in the traditional sense. I mean, obviously all these films are sequels to one another, but this one picks up where the last one left off. Like the events of Casino Royale like affects the events of this film, and like there's character motivations that directly result from Casino Royale. It's very strange why they felt the need to do that. And in some ways, it feels influenced by the Bourne movies. Bourne and Bond kind of get talked about in the same conversation in terms of like spy, good practical fight scenes and stuff like that. Casino Royale had really good fighting, but I wouldn't consider that the same as the Bourne films. But I think there are certain scenes in Quantum of Solace that look straight up like Bourne Supremacy. So, all right, here's one that you can talk on. Let's talk about Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen.
Yeah, and kind of again with Origins Wolverine, it definitely speaks for itself all these years later. But it just like you're watching it and you're just like, none of this was written. It's all just kind of happening on its own, and it's seriously, yeah. It's really hard to talk about that in a writing sense because again, you have nothing to go off of. Things just sort of just like happen because then why not? We need a movie. Megatron, he comes back. Optimus Prime dies and comes back. Sam goes to robot heaven.
He does. He goes to robot heaven.
He goes to robot heaven. And he comes back. It's just, things are just so weird and chaotic in that movie. And you could argue that for all the Transformers movies, but it's just cranked up in this movie.
Yeah, so I'm sure you remember this, but there was an old Red Letter Media video at this point where they watched the first 3 Transformers movies at the same time, where it's just a loud cacophony of metal madness. But they make a point to address that there's a lot of similarities between the films, specifically the first 2 films, where they kind of, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out, they were just trying to copy what worked with the first film and apply it with this.
Mm-hmm.
And even at the time, Shia LaBeouf was like bad-mouthing this movie when it came out.
Yeah.
He was doing that a lot with a lot of his movies at that point. He was doing that with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull as well. But I think when the third one came out, he was like, I think we did a little better with this one. And I mean, sure, it's longer. It's longer, but there's less racism in it, so that's good, I guess. This also came out the same year as G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra. Have you ever seen this movie or any of the G.I. Joe movies?
Never, no.
Okay. So I never saw... So I did see Revenge of the Fallen in theaters. I think you did too.
I think so, yeah.
I remember still being amazed at the incredible special effects that I didn't totally hate it, but I knew it was a bad movie. And then years later, I saw some scenes on TV and I thought, I can't watch any more of this. This is terrible. I think the first film still has some merit, and I've not watched any of the Michael Bay Transformers films in a long time. But G.I. Joe, just to transition to that real quick, that's another movie on the list. I watched that movie years later on TV once, and I did not think much of it at all. I barely remember that film, to be honest. I remember Joseph Gordon-Levitt was in it. So did you know that Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays Cobra Commander?
I didn't know. Yeah, this is all news to me.
Science! It's a very goofy performance. But anyway, back to Revenge of the Fallen. Doesn't the mom get high accidentally?
Wait, what's that?
Doesn't the mom in that movie get high accidentally?
I think so. Yeah, it was like when they were moving him in or something.
Yeah, she's like a pop brownie.
Oh.
I also remember the enemy scrotum. I remember that.
What?
It's the funny thing where it's the same film again, plot structure wise, but they added like a cheating boyfriend subplot for Shia LaBeouf. But it's stupid. I don't like those Michael Bay Transformers movies. They're not for me. I don't understand how they made so much money. Like, I know the reason why. I just don't understand it.
You did have the Rainn Wilson scene though. That's still a quality scene.
God, he was in that movie. All right. Any other thoughts on Revenge of the Fallen?
No.
Okay. Okay. So this next one, this one will brighten the mood a little bit. Star Trek.
Okay.
2009. Now, I've not told you the rest of this list yet, but would you say this is the best film that's in the list?
Sure, of the ones we've gone over so far, yeah.
Okay, good. And that might be your same answer for the rest.
Okay, then. Yeah, there we go.
So I enjoyed the first Abrams Star Trek movie. It's been a long time since I've watched it. I believe the script was turned in the day before the strike began. And as a result, they couldn't change anything while they were shooting. Like, they can't add jokes and things like that because J.J. Abrams is also part of the Writers Guild, so he couldn't go in and change things. But it's an enjoyable movie, a really good, big adventure blockbuster film with a lot of likable characters and also a lot of nice Star Trek-y references. I think people are a little harsh on this looking back. Like, at the time, a lot of people loved it, but now it's cool to look back and go, that movie sucks. And it's like, well, that's not fair. I mean, I guess because people don't like J.J. Abrams now. I mean, I'm not saying they should because he may have made a blunder or two recently. But I think the 2009 Star Trek film is a fine film.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all of that. So again, I haven't seen any of the the new Trek films in a while. But this one's enjoyable, and that does kind of make sense. It's like there's not too much really happening in the actual movie, so it kind of makes sense.
Other
it
than
does...
like a canonical reason to reboot it, like there's an actual
yeah,
establishing a new timeline, like trying to get like audiences to accept a canonical new timeline. Like, can you think of another movie that does that?
And like still connects it to the old one because you still have like Leonard Nimoy in it.
Yeah.
It's very weird.
I mean, the only thing I could think of is I guess they did that with X-Men, but
I was going to say X-Men, then there's that one, but
that has its own reason for doing it. It's not a look, we're not erasing this. It's very strange that they felt the need to do that. It's just a different timeline, and like all the Star Trek stuff we get today is part of the old timeline. It's not part of the Kelvin timeline as it's called.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It definitely does feel like a first draft for a film, and like that's kind of what you get. And again, none of it's terrible by any means. We both said it's the best that we're gonna get out of this list, and it's not even the worst out of all the Trek films. You got Into Darkness to go right after this, so it's so.
But Beyond is a really good movie.
Beyond was really good, yeah, and I think that's just because you don't have because I don't think Kurtzman wrote Beyond, did he?
I don't know. That was Simon Pegg.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that explains it then.
And Kurtzman, notably, also he's one of the writers for Revenge of the Fallen as well.
There you go.
He could do it all. Not that I love the second one, but I think that has some enjoyable stuff as well. I mean, all three are kind of enjoyable films. I mean, they all have Carl Urban in
it. Yeah.
And John Cho. I don't know. I like John Cho.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so have you seen Angels and Demons?
I haven't.
So, are you familiar with it?
Not really, no. I don't think I've ever heard of this one before.
Okay, so it's a Ron Howard movie that stars Tom Hanks. It's not the Da Vinci Code, and it's not whatever the third one's called. I've seen the Da Vinci Code, but I've not seen any of the others. So I've not seen Angels and Demons, actually. So for whatever reason, I should look this up without claiming this. Otherwise, I'll sound like a moron. But I guess I'll sound like a moron. So I have a feeling that Angels and Demons, the book, is a prequel, but they made the film adaptation a sequel.
Interesting.
Okay, so I was correct.
Oh, wow.
Angels and Demons, like this is from Google. Angels and Demons is, of course, a book in the same series of the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, although it's actually a prequel to the Da Vinci book. It's here presented as a sequel, talking about the film. So, yeah, I was right. Look, that was amazing. I've never seen that film, and somehow I knew that random fact.
Wow.
So, the first one was such a big success. Like, that made a lot of money, which is weird to think that the Da Vinci Code was a really big film. That was so big that they were like, well, we can't just like we gotta treat this as a sequel. It's so strange. I guess the events of the book maybe like maybe it's like a Temple of Doom situation. It's not like things have to go in a certain order like X-Men Origins Wolverine. So there's that. Next on the list is a pretty notable one, and that is Dragon Ball Evolution.
Okay. So yeah,
are you aware of its what's that?
Yeah, I've never seen a Dragon Ball thing ever. So,
are you aware of its reputation at least?
No, actually. So
okay, so I'll summarize it real quick because I've not actually seen this, but it's a live action adaptation of Dragon Ball, obviously, and it's terrible. So I mean, obviously, this would follow a trend of like later anime live action adaptations that we get. Some controversial ones, like there's the Ghost in the Shell one that people have forgotten about now, and then there was also that Alita Battle Angel, which I guess has gained like cult status now, where people, some weirdos, I might add, like that movie for whatever reason. I don't like Alita Battle Angel. I think anyone that likes that movie is a but I've never seen Dragon Ball Evolution. And I actually did watch some Dragon Ball Z as a kid. Like I had a friend that was into it, and he tried to get me into it. So when Dragon Ball Evolution was coming out and it looked like that, I was like, I'm not watching that. So I never saw it. I think the kid that plays Goku is Tom Cruise's son in War of the Worlds, but that's all I know that guy from. So it's not like they got a guy with no experience. But I remember when he was a white guy, I was like, wait, what are they doing? What?
Right.
So this was never going to be good. Is the bottom line. So, I mean, with a lot of these, I mean, we talked about how the film is bad and it could have been bad without the writer's strike, but this final one I have on my list is one where the writer's strike really affected this, actually. And that is Terminator Salvation.
Oh.
This is a big one. So I'm the Terminator guy, and I guess I'll take the reins here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I will stand by that this one isn't that bad. Mainly because the one that came after this, Terminator Genisys, was really terrible. And the third film gets a lot of flack because it follows a very similar structure to Terminator 2, but it's nowhere near as good and it doesn't have as good a visionary behind it. And I think the reason I don't mind Salvation now is because it's the one that tries to do something different. It's actually set after Judgment Day, but John Connor isn't the leader of the Resistance yet. And it's like, okay, that's an interesting concept. Like, if you're going to make a Terminator film and you don't want to do John Connor or Sarah Connor gets chased by a robot from the future, what do you do? Like, we've seen glimpses of what post-Judgment Day looks like. Like, let's set a film there. Then somehow they come up with the idea that John Connor shouldn't be the lead character. It should be some fella who is part Terminator, part human, who doesn't know he's got Terminator bits. Like, it's kind of a weird idea. And one of the ideas that they had for the film that they didn't write or it was scrapped during the strike, I'm not exactly sure how that happened, but the ending of the film currently stands as Sam Worthington's character, who has a lot of Terminator body parts, but he still has a human heart. He gives his heart to John Connor in a heart transplant surgery because John Connor was stabbed through the heart by a Terminator that I think was Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think it's the same Terminator that does that. Like, for context, just to set it up, there is a not great CGI Arnold that's in the movie because he couldn't actually be in it because he was the governor of California at the time. But I actually think it's not that bad, even by today's standards. I mean, you look back on it and it looks better than young Jeff Bridges in Tron Legacy, and that came out after. And they had Jeff Bridges on set for that. So
yeah,
I don't think it looks that bad, but I'm not going to say it's great. It's fine.
Yeah.
But anyway, they melt off all his flesh so they don't have to keep on CGIing Arnold on this bodybuilder, so he's just a Terminator skeleton. So I believe it's the same Terminator that stabs John Connor through the heart. So the ending is he gets a heart transplant from Sam Worthington's character, but the original ending was going to be that Skynet activated something within Sam Worthington, and then he killed John Connor and all the main Resistance people, and then wore John Connor's skin or something like that. And then, oh no, the leader of the Resistance is now a Terminator. And I kind of hate that ending because it's so nihilistic and so, oh God, how gross.
Yeah.
It's kind of how the ending of Terminator 3 is, which is too bad. Judgment Day is inevitable. Like they say those exact words in the film. So to end a movie like that again would have been a grave mistake. And it's clear that sequels were planned for Terminator Salvation. Like I remember reading plans at one point that was going to include Robert Patrick and things like that. And it was going to be time travel shenanigans again, but with an adult John Connor, which sounds interesting. I believe those were plans. I might be reading someone's fan fiction that wound up online. I don't know that for a fact, but so Terminator Salvation is just another boring film that follows some uninteresting characters. I mean, the most interesting character to me is the young Kyle Reese, which is played by Anton Yelchin, who had that and Star Trek in the same summer. So that was a big year for him. And Sam Worthington had Terminator Salvation and Avatar in the same year. And then we never saw him again until Avatar 2.
Yeah.
So 2009 was a big blockbuster year, and the Terminator films have all been spread out in release. The third one came out in 2003, so this is 2009. So this was a shorter gap, but I appreciate that it tried to do something different, but the script is just kind of bland, and the R-rated cut, which is the director's cut that is out there these days, doesn't really add anything in the way of violence, but there's not much to it. I think you see some side boob, and that's it in terms of giving it a higher rating, and it's an okay movie. It's very forgettable because it's the most different to the others. And something that was going on at the same time as Terminator Salvation's release was the Terminator TV show, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, which, again, is something people forget about. There was a Terminator TV show? Yeah. It was on Fox. It was on prime time. It had some notable actors in it, and people don't really remember it. Like, I mean, this is kind of the problem with Terminator, is that everyone remembers the second one. The second one is the one everyone remembers the most, and you remind people of the first one, and they go, oh yeah, Arnold's the bad guy originally, but culturally, people remember the second one the most, like the Hasta la Vista baby and the liquid metal Terminator. Like, everyone remembers all that stuff, and people have already forgotten Dark Fate, and there's been no talk of Terminator for a while now, which means it might finally be dead.
One can only hope.
Right. At one point, though, they brought on Jonathan Nolan to write a treatment for the script to Salvation, and I think he was pretty deep into the script, and the writer's strike began, and then he had to stop. So that's another thing as well. Like, here's a proven writer. Here's someone that worked on films with Christian Bale as the star of the film. So I guess culturally, the thing people remember the most about the film isn't something that happens in the film, and it's the Christian Bale rant. And
yeah.
I guess when that's the thing people remember the most about your film, you kind of failed on making a memorable film.
Mm-hmm.
But to be fair, it is an iconic rant.
Oh, well, yeah, for sure.
Well, Chris, that was the writer's strike. We got one going on right now. Hopefully Blade won't be pushed back again. Oh, wait. Ooh. They've spoken too soon.
Yep.
Is there anything you want to talk about now? Have any big films been released lately?
I mean, not too much.
Well, speaking of writers real quick, James Gunn recently turned in his first draft for Superman Legacy. So hopefully that first draft is good.
Yeah, first draft,
And it's
maybe
like,
only
who
draft.
knows what else will be affected in the future? I mean, like, will the Batman be like the Daniel Craig Bond films in that Casino Royale and the Batman? Both really good films, but will the sequel be like Quantum of Solace?
Oh, please
Will we
no.
get a dud? Who knows? I mean, but speaking of Blade and other iconic Marvel characters, such as Blade, um, we got the final installment of the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, I guess you can call it. Now, real quick, um, I'm gonna soapbox real quick. I have a problem with calling it a trilogy because there is no true trilogy in the MCU. Like,
No, not really.
like with this, we have the first two films, but then major character developments happen in two whole other Avengers movies, and then 5 minutes in another movie, but you can skip that one, I guess. And then a holiday special. But this is the final James Gunn Guardians film. So it's a trilogy in that sense. I mean, and then I don't know if you heard about this, but James Gunn had done an interview saying that to him, there wasn't a lot of great third films in a trilogy. And one of the examples of a good one he gives was Spider-Man 3. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? But when he said that, I was like, wow, so Civil War, Infinity War, Iron Man 3, Thor Ragnarok, No Way Home, all those films, just fuck them. Again, I don't really see any of those films as the third in a trilogy either. Like, I don't. But if he's talking about Guardians as the third in a trilogy, he must see those as the third of a trilogy. So when I saw that, I just thought, well, you can't really call those a trilogy when I've got to watch two other movies, the beginning of another movie, and a Christmas special to know what these guys are up to. Because a character like Nebula, for example, like I really like Nebula. I think she might be my favorite character of the Guardians, but a lot of her great characterization comes from Infinity War and Endgame. Although she does go through a lot in the second Guardians film, whereas in the first film she's sort of a henchman. So I just thought that was a weird comment that James Gunn had made. Maybe he took it back later. I'm not sure. So Chris, what did you think of this third film?
Well, I loved it. Seriously though, this is genuinely, for sure for me, this is the best Marvel movie since Endgame, which I know that's probably being tossed around everywhere. But like, and you know, our views may differ a little bit here and there, but in terms of what's going to stick with me as far as Marvel goes and where Marvel has been recently, this is going to stick with me the most out of pretty much anything that Marvel's put out lately or will put out with their lineup of films and shows. Because it definitely like brought me back to Quantumania a lot, and how like when I watched that, I was so done. Like I was just so miserable watching that. Yeah, I didn't really have fun, but I didn't really have like a burning hatred either. I was just stuck in this endless like limbo of just mad, forgettable, won't think about it the next day. Whereas this, it's been a week since I saw it, and I'm still thinking about it. And I haven't rewatched it yet, but it's genuinely like one of the only things Marvel's put out recently where like I'm actually excited to see this again, and I'm excited to um, I don't know, it's just kind of really just kind of think about this trilogy, I guess, quote unquote, a lot more because if you are going to classify this as a trilogy, and I understand what you're saying, but I definitely see it more from like a director's standpoint, where this is James Gunn's kind of milestone, I guess you could say, in the MCU. A lot of directors had theirs, like John Watts and Peyton Reed with their trilogies, and again, this one it just sticks out the most in terms of what we have for Marvel. So. That's kind of my overall views of Guardians 3. There are some technical aspects editing wise that I wasn't too big a fan of in like the first third, but we'll talk about that.
Sure. So It's going to sound like I didn't love this film as much because I do have some complaints, so I'm prepared for people to not like me for a while. This is getting an overwhelmingly positive reception, but I really, really enjoyed it. I thought this was a very good film. I've seen it twice already, and with a lot of the recent Marvel films, I tend to enjoy them more on a second viewing, not like significantly more, not like oh, now I get it, but I've just enjoyed them more a second time. And we've talked a little bit about what an audience experience is like and how certain aspects of you seeing a film for the first time can affect your opinion of it. And the audience that I was with weren't as into the film, so maybe that affected my viewing of it a little bit. There's a lot of character stuff that I really appreciate. I like a lot of the action sequences. The scene in the second film, the fight Gamora and Nebula have, I remember thinking it was a really cool how like the camera swings around and has these wide angle lenses used for close-ups and things like that, which I thought was really neat. And there's a lot of that in this film, and I thought that looked pretty cool. I mean, there's a hallway fight in this that's essentially like a one take kind of trick to it. That's probably the coolest the Guardians have ever looked in their movies.
Yeah.
Just filmmaking wise. And I will bring up film Twitter again because they annoy me to no end, where they'll like look at a shot. There's been a recent trend in some movies recently of like a character that flies, where they'll do like a GoPro sort of shot with them. It doesn't work all the time, in my opinion, but there's a shot in this one where Adam Warlock is flying and like it's like right up at his face, and people are like posting that in GIFs and saying, "Look how terrible this looks." But when you see it on a big screen, like how it's meant to be viewed, like it has a different effect and I thought it worked in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have a problem with that, and I also didn't have a problem with Adam Warlock. Before we talk about him, I'll finish up my quick thoughts on the film as a whole, just before we get into that. We got that. I think what is very clear is that this is a very like James Gunn put his whole heart into this. It's a very heartfelt send-off for these characters, and it felt like a finale in some ways, and it didn't in others. And we'll get to the post-credit scene later because the whole audience went, "Oh," at that, and I went, "Oh." I mean, okay. Let's talk about Adam Warlock real quick. We'll start there, and I guess from here on out we'll just talk spoilers.
Yeah. Which is kind of interesting because there wasn't. There was always. I mean, I think all Marvel movies have like that. Like, no, don't spoil this going out for all their movies. There wasn't really too much to spoil with this, and I think that in and of itself is kind of the spoiler with like where people had their expectations with, you know, who do you think is gonna die? And I mean, we're already in spoilers, and plot twist is nobody dies. Everyone gets the happy ending.
I mean, a planet full of people die, but none of the Guardians die.
Yeah, and so I guess that was kind of like the twist in a way, is especially knowing James Gunn and you know, like he killed Yondu in Guardians 2, and then like 80% of the Suicide Squad in that movie. And so we were all just kind of bracing, especially with the trailers, having it heavily focused on Rocket. And we were all expecting it to happen, but it just never does. Yeah. And I was fine with that. Anyways, Adam Warlock.
Think of Adam Warlock, yes.
So yeah, Adam Warlock. Yeah, so I never really had like high expectations as far as the character went. Mm-hmm. I was much more interested, even before the movie, like I was more interested in the idea of going through Rocket's backstory. And it definitely feels this way in the movie where it's like, oh yeah, Adam Warlock's, he's there. And I know James Gunn said in an interview that he said he felt like pressure to put Adam Warlock in the movie, which kind of makes sense when you're watching it. But I enjoyed Adam Warlock a lot in this movie. Will Poulter, that's how you say his name, right?
I think so.
Okay. I haven't seen him too much. I know he's in Bandersnatch. That's the thing I know him from. And he's great in there, and he's great in this. And his character is basically just a toddler. in this movie.
Yeah, 'cause I think the joke with this is that they hatched him out too early.
Yeah, and so he doesn't quite know what's what in the movie, and he's very protective of like the little animals, and
Mhm. The
and
character that he reminded me of the most, this is going to sound strange, he reminded me of Prince Charming from Shrek 2, in that, with the whole mother aspect and the golden hair, like it just kind
yeah,
of reminded me of that.
I never put that together, but yeah, that kind of that does make sense now. Um,
But so I guess the one thing I didn't really get was when they recreated the creation of man painting.
I thought about that
When
too.
like like I don't know about how your theater was when that happened, but it was dead silent in my theater. Um, was
I
there
think
any reaction to that in yours?
you see, I'm like trying to remember the reaction because the only one clear reaction of my theater that I remember was the post-credit scene, which we'll talk about. But um, and maybe it's just because I was more focused on the movie this time around than paying attention to what the audience was doing. So there wasn't really like too many big reactions to a lot of the things. So I maybe it's just that, but yeah, I don't really remember there being anything going on there.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mind Adam Warlock that much. I was kind of amused by him. I mean,
Yeah.
as that the creation of man painting recreation was happening, like I thought people are not gonna like this. I mean, like, the
Hmm.
recent stretch of characters that have been poorly adapted, I say with giant quotation marks, like Taskmaster or MODOK. Like I figured he was gonna be lumped in with those people, and
Hmm.
people are gonna complain about it online till the end of time. And but yeah, I didn't mind it. I guess we should talk about Rocket because Rocket is kind of the main star of the film, and I liked all of the flashback stuff a lot. But
Oh yeah, for sure.
I don't know. Maybe I found the resolution to that story a little anticlimactic, but I don't know. What'd you think of all that?
We're talking about Rocket now.
Yes.
No, I thought he was great. He was definitely the kind of the heart and soul of the movie for sure. The flashback stuff definitely it will traumatize a lot of people, especially if you're like if you have a hard time watching animal cruelty. This one, especially with how like the dialogue's written, it's very effective in that regards. And um, the resolution, I I was fine with. It's him just getting a second chance basically with freeing the animals and not just being a kind of murderous raccoon and being the monster he's been told he is throughout the entire life. I was fine with it. I can understand why you think it was anticlimactic, but from a
I guess
character sense, I thought it was more rewarding that way than kind of just a grand scale movie sense.
I guess for me, the reason why I feel that way is because Rocket is mainly on his deathbed throughout the whole movie in the present timeline. So when he finally gets back, it kind of, there is a sort of like detachment from like his decision to finally join in on the fight again and rescue the animals. But that said, like when the moment that really got me is when he finds the baby raccoons
Yeah.
and goes to rescue them, and then he gets the moment when he fights the High Evolutionary, where he refers to himself as Rocket Raccoon, which is one of those, I guess, cliches in superhero movies where a character refers to himself as a superhero movie, but it's the third movie. But I thought that moment was really great.
Yeah.
I really liked that moment. It's funny they didn't do the thing I figured they were going to do, and I'm kind of happy that they didn't. Was I thought they were going to do Rocket meets Groot, like Solo. Like I thought that was exactly what they were going to do, and they didn't. And I actually applaud them for that. And just on that point, I felt that Groot was a little underutilized in this. And okay, I gotta talk about this since we're talking spoilers. I hated Groot speaking English in the very end. I hated that. That
um.
might have affected how I felt about the movie. I'm not gonna lie.
Okay. So I think it was thrown out somewhere. I don't know if you noticed, but it's technically it's just the audience understanding Groot at that point.
Was that something that people wanted to see?
No. Um, no, I wasn't a huge fan of that either. Like I get it from like that standpoint of like, oh, we understand Groot now, but it's like I feel like it'd be more effective if he just said I am Groot and we kind of got the
Or
vibe
just
of what
have
he
him say,
said.
"We are Groot again."
You can have him do that again, but I'm okay if he just says I am Groot because you don't literally have to have him say I love you guys
It's like,
if he said I am Groot, I would have gotten that exact same vibe. That's
yeah,
all I'm gonna say. It's
yeah.
like I like I get it. Like I do. Like I don't hate it, but I definitely it's not one of my favorite things about the movie for sure. And Groot, I understand that he was a little underutilized in this movie, especially. I mean, I kind of think that way really for Groot in general, past the first Guardians. I mean, I know there's not much you can do with him as a baby, and what they do with him as a baby is really awesome. But
Yeah, I think to me, Baby Groot is like the pinnacle of Groot. Where
yeah,
like, I mean, I like him more than Baby Yoda. That's for sure. But,
yeah,
but I
yeah.
mean, Baby Groot, he gets to put the bomb in the big brain,
Hmm.
and so he gets that at least. And obviously, Teenage Groot, he makes Stormbreaker.
He makes Stormbreaker, yeah.
Um, I mean, he gets a cool like. I like the high evolutionary fight he does where he hides all the guns. Like that was cool.
Neat little trick, yeah.
But him speaking, it's like Pikachu speaking in that one Pokemon movie where it's funny because like I mean this didn't affect what I thought about it, but when it started happening, I was like, oh, and in the audience, like you can hear what, like it wasn't like an outrage, it wasn't like that Pokemon reaction video. Like I mean I haven't seen that Pokemon movie, I've just seen that bootleg clip online where the audience reacts in horror at Pikachu speaking. And I mean, it
Yeah.
wasn't that bad, but it was getting to that. Like, I mean,
It,
like I said,
it
just have him
was
say, "We are Groot" again.
yeah, it was awkward. I think that's the best way to put it. It's just because we're so used to just the I am Groot part, and there's a lot that line can convey despite it being the same words over and over again.
Hmm.
I think it's a good example of it's how you say it, not what you say. And if you just had "We are Groot," and again, I would have been fine with still just "I am Groot," then you still would have gotten that message across without literally having to say "I love you guys." Because at first, I like when I watched it, I kind of made a joke. I was like, did they accidentally like swap out one of his lines for the new Fast and Furious movie? and then for Fast X,
Just
we're
have
gonna
him
hear
say
him say
"family," and then it'll be all the more.
yeah, and then and the new Fast and Furious, we're gonna have him say "I am Groot" for some reason, and then oh, they totally swapped the lines. But
Wow.
no, yeah.
But I just thought he was such a major character in the other ones, and in this, he was just kind of just there. I mean, not that I was disappointed by it, but I sort of noticed halfway through the film, like, when's Groot gonna do something? Like, it occurred to me that he just doesn't have much to do in this one.
Sure, and I think that's just kind of because, I mean, you have all the characters kind of doing their own, well, not really doing their own thing, but it's very split in half. You have kind of half the movie is focused on Rocket's backstory, and then the other half is focused on like getting the MacGuffin to help heal Rocket. And I think when they go to that like weird like space organ thing, whatever, where they have to like go through it literally. And he wasn't there for that. Like I
No.
know they have like that spacesuit scene where they're all like talking on their comms, and he wasn't there. Which I get it. He's a big tree. You probably don't have like spacesuits for that, but um, yeah. So he really just I don't know. I get what you're saying, but Groot, it's hard to give a character like that so many like big moments like this, especially when you have all of these characters. I mean, there are a lot of characters in this movie, and they all kind of get their big moments
Hmm.
to shine. And Groot, like if you, I guess if you did have to cut one of those out, Groot probably does make the most sense from a writing standpoint. It's just because you kind of gave him his moment in the first Guardians movie and even in Infinity War. So I understand that like creatively why that is.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on Nebula? I mean, I kind of brought it up earlier that I really love Nebula. Like I love, there's a moment I do love in the movie where Nebula hears Rocket's voice when he wakes up, and she's like genuinely like on the like I think she like starts crying tears of joy that her friend is okay.
Yeah.
And like I mean, when you think about it, Rocket and Nebula are the two that survived the snap, so they're kind of similar in some ways. They're both like kind of cyborgs in a way.
Well, yeah, in that literal sense, but also it's kind of like, if anyone understands Rocket's just emotional pain, it would be that character. So that
Like
was
we
a really
get
great
the little
moment.
brief setup in the beginning of like where we get a glimpse of what happened to Rocket when he was young, and Nebula says like that's worse than anything that Thanos ever did to me, which that says a lot. I mean,
Right.
there's like I think back to that great shot in Infinity War where Nebula is like all like taken apart.
She's in pieces, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like the forced perspective kind of thing, 3D kind of thing where you see everything, and it's like it's such a cool shot.
hmm
But yeah,
No,
I think Nebula's great in this.
yeah, Nebula is really great, and it's great to see like, she was this, she was kind of like a side villain in the first movie, and then she's kind of grown up as we get to know her more, and now she's essentially like basically like one of the parents, or maybe like the lead parents of the Guardians. Basically, she acts the most kind
Yeah.
of adult throughout the whole thing, and not necessarily in a bad way. Like all the other characters are, childish. Well, I mean, some of them are. Drax, I think we'll talk about in a sec, but but no, she's kind of like taking care of business. She doesn't really like hesitate with anything. She's kind of just got that like go 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 attitude, and I thought she was great in this. So
Thoughts on Gamora?
thoughts on Gamora. So this is kind of one of the more interesting things, because I remember when we were talking about like Comic-Con and you watched like the bootleg trailer for this, and this is one of the more interesting aspects of the movie for you going into it. And this, I feel like this is also kind of another twist, at least on my end, is that her character just in and of herself doesn't really have too much to do outside of like learning to trust this family she once had again. Which I was fine with, because I feel like her character in this one kind of it was more of a catalyst for where Peter's character goes in this movie, which we'll talk about. But as far as Gamora, just on her own, she doesn't really have too much to do in terms of like, one, the overall plot, but two, kind of her emotional growth isn't too different than what we've seen of the character before. And I think that's the point. I'll let you talk about it before we talk about like how the relationship goes in the movie.
So, I mean, one of the things that I don't think I've spoken about this before, but one of the things I don't like about Endgame is the Peter and Gamora reunion, where like Peter has a moment where he is reunited with her, and then it's just a kick in the balls joke. And so I was kind of hoping that we'd get more out of this, and I feel like we do for the most part. And I actually applaud like the idea of like giving them a mature ending where they don't get back together.
Oh, I do too. Yeah.
And like there's a real emphasis throughout the film for Peter to focus on what he has and what he doesn't have in this movie, which obviously comes back in the very end where he visits his grandfather who's still alive. And so I do appreciate having a more mature ending with the two, but I also think there was another way they could have done that gives you a little bit of hope, because again, James Gunn mentioning Spider-Man 3 as one of the good ones. I like the ending of that film where Peter and Mary Jane aren't just back together. Like they don't have the big kiss moment or anything like that. They kind of dance together, and it's like, okay, they're on their way to mending their relationship. It's not just all is forgiven. Like you don't just snap your fingers, no pun intended, and change everything. Like, you know, they're on the path to maybe being what they were. And I think if they'd done something similar to that, I would have been fine with them not getting back together or not doing, or heaven forbid, a stupid memory transplant thing or something like that. Like, I don't know why you brought back Gamora if you weren't going to do that. And I know that wasn't James Gunn, and I was kind of confused because she's not totally a different person. She's the person that she was in the beginning of the first Guardians, and that's where their story begins. So when she's super violent, it's like, wait, what? It's like they're taking Gamora from years before when she was still working under Thanos and wasn't about to betray him. I just didn't quite understand why they went with that route with Gamora.
Yeah, and again, for me, her character was more interesting in the sense of where it takes Peter's character, and I mean, I kind of get like her more kind of angry side is that this is still her in her prime, like assassin years, basically, as far as where her character is literally. And her going with the Ravagers, it's all fun to see, and her the jokes in and of themselves of like her trying to about to kill everyone is it's great to see, even if it is done a lot. But it's especially great to see with like Adam Warlock later in the movie, where it's like, "Don't be rash," and, and that was great. But
what do you think is the moment that got you the most emotionally? Like, what's the big like tearjerker moment for you in this?
Oh, it was Lila's death for sure, and it was specifically when like Rocket's screaming and you just see her corpse. It's like it's really haunting, and it was you're not really because like things are gonna go bad when you see all these flashbacks. It's just leading up towards that, and obviously you expect the character's gonna die. And I think it's just because it just happens just like that. There's not like any big build up. They don't have like this big escape and it kind of goes wrong along the way. No, she just dies right there. And there's nothing Rocket could really do except just let it all out. So
mine is actually the moment right after that.
Okay.
It's the moment where Rocket goes berserk that got me because I mean, yeah, the death itself is really sad, but I think like the moment where Rocket like starts killing everyone, shooting up the place, like that's like that to me is the start of the character that we see, where like you had this like cute furry creature, this innocent creature that had no evil intentions whatsoever, be pushed to that extreme. To see him lash out like that is like really tragic. It's in my mind. Like that really affected me. That was really effective.
Yeah, sure.
It feels like James Gunn puts a lot of himself in Rocket, and this is a movie about outcasts and weirdos. And I think that's why a lot of people love these movies so much because they can relate to this in some way. Like they can kind of see like the real life turn and how that decision could be made. But that said, do you think there was maybe a little too much in the way of, because like the otter character, Lila,
Lila
has a line of, "This is your story, Rocket," and she looks into the camera. Like I kind of felt there were moments like that where you don't have to spell it out so much. Like, I mean, that's kind of a Gunn thing as well, like, because he can be a little pat on the back-ish in certain moments. Like, I'll come back around to this film, but in the second film, when I first saw it, at the time, I didn't buy the huge send-off for Yondu because it never felt like that character earned that for me, and it felt like it was James Gunn giving his friend like a big tribute in the film, which is fine, but in a similar way, he tries to give several of the characters in this their big epic moment, and a lot of that happens really close together. Like, for example, there's a part where Mantis says that the big creatures with all the teeth and tentacles, like they don't want to hurt them, they're just afraid. And she goes over and does her mind reading thing, and the music swells really big, and it's like this huge epic moment, and she's crying, and I was kind of like, I don't know. I was a little confused. Like had they gone up against those creatures throughout the film, maybe that big epic music swell moment might have made a little more sense. But to me, like those creatures were just afraid. Like maybe a soft piano, maybe a couple of strings, but there's a lot of really big booming score moments, and score isn't normally a thing that I complain about, but Mantis reading the mind of a creature was essentially given the same score treatment as Yondu's death in the second film. And I know Tyler Bates wasn't doing the score this time around. I think he did the score for John Wick 4. So I assume he was probably working on that. But a moment like that just stood out to me as like, how epic is this when I didn't think that was entirely necessary?
Sure. See, like, I get it from the standpoint of the score. In the movie itself, though, like, I was fine with all the moments. Again, you do have, like, you give it to every character, basically. Like, every character has the moment, and there's a ton of characters this time around. But I wasn't necessarily too bothered by that, just because I mean, yeah, James Gunn's stuff can be a little bit on the nose, but I again maybe it's just because of like where I've seen Marvel and how so much of their stuff recently has kind of just been nothing. It's gone nowhere, and I'm honestly like I'm okay with stuff being just like a little bit too in your face, like just because it shows, hey, there's actual effort being put into this. Especially I didn't watch like Love and Thunder before this. I know you did just for 2 minutes of the movie, but
I mainly just watched like the first like 30 minutes or so.
You were just kind of checked out after that.
Yeah, I was checked out after that.
But you know what I mean, though? It's like it just goes nowhere. The whole movie is just a giant wet fart joke. It's just, and then, but this, like, you might say, I mean, again, from the score standpoint, I did notice that early on how it wasn't Tyler Bates doing this, even though there are plenty of like his.
There's references to his work in the score.
I wouldn't even say references. Like it sounded like actual tracks from the other movies put into this. It didn't even sound like an adaptation of them. But yeah, for the most part, this I need to pay attention to the score again when I check this out again. But I could see what you mean by that, where the score can like infer that this is supposed to have the same emotional weight as, like you said, the death of Yondu, which is very, very different than Mantis just feeling the emotions of these monsters. I mean, again, it's not terrible, but yeah.
They just kind of felt like it was just a callback to the second film. I mean, to be fair, I mean, with that film, it leads to a really funny joke from Drax in that film where he mispronounces the name of the batteries, where he just goes, "Arbuary batteries."
Yeah.
That is not what I said, but Drax, I guess on that note, he's still great in this.
He's great.
Dave Bautista is still really, really funny. I mean, there's a great gag where he keeps trying to lay down on the couch and people keep telling him not to do it.
Yeah.
I laughed at that a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And,
yeah, Dave Bautista's Drax, and it is interesting because in the first movie there really weren't that many like LOL moments with Drax, like where I mean, like he's comedic just because he takes things very seriously, obviously, because he doesn't understand metaphors at all. Mm-hmm. But I think it's the second one. Yeah, the second one is where he kind of had like those more like random, laugh out loud moments, and that just kind of
that in the holiday special
for sure. And probably because he's like the co-star of that special, basically. But yeah, so I feel like along the way they just kind of thought, I don't know, but yeah, Drax is hilarious in this. He's but he does get his payoff, which is something that like I didn't even think about with the second movie. Is it's outside of like one scene, it's kind of ignored that like, oh yeah, he was a dad he was a husband and a dad, and he lost his parents, because that's like the whole thing about his character in the first movie, and then he gets like one scene in the second movie, and there's kind of like he gets that payoff in this one where he literally has to become like a father figure to all these like new kids that are uh from the High Evolutionary, and he gets the payoff by just being a dad in front of them, and
Yeah.
that kind of gains their trust and all that. And it was great, but yeah, he was delightful in this movie.
Yeah, and I mean throughout the movie, people like Nebula call him like a moron and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And then, but when she sees how he is as a dad, basically, like that, it's a nice little sweet payoff in the end when he essentially helps run Nowhere with Nebula.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know about you, but when he makes like when he talks to the kids and he's like, my daughter liked when I made monkey noises, and he just makes like robot noises. Um, I was laughing a lot at that moment, and the music does swell up during that moment, but that was actually a funny use of the music because where it's like it's made to look like look at this epic thing, and it's the silliest thing in the world happening right now. But
Mhm.
just real quickly, like that was a moment I could tell people were thinking this is weird, but not me. I was laughing a lot. I thought that was very funny.
Yeah, and I didn't. I mean, I guess in and of itself, yeah, it's weird and goofy, but like again, that's the whole thing is about these movies. That's what draws them in, and that's what gets them attached to these characters. Is that yeah, it's goofy, but you care at the end, and I think that's the main achievement all three of these movies have gotten, and why they stand out so much in this vast Marvel sea.
And I guess speaking of comedy, this is making the rounds in like news articles everywhere, but this is officially the first MCU movie to use the F bomb.
Hmm.
What did you think of that?
Well, all right. Well, first of all, is this also like, I guess that has to be like the first Disney movie, or the first Disney production to ever use an F-bomb?
It must be. I mean, excluding like Miramax stuff, but which is technically under Disney. But as far as
Okay.
like pure Disney stuff, this might be the first.
Okay. And I think the F-bomb, honestly, is kind of one of the more generous, like leaning a little bit more into that darker territory, because you see someone's like skin ripped off in this movie, and you see like the insides of their face basically. And there's some really dark and gritty imagery in this movie. And I think the F-bomb is honestly the most generous thing the movie puts out there.
I
But
was gonna say, yeah, because I mean, I have some thoughts on the F bomb itself. I think as far as it's used in the film itself, I think it's really well placed and well used by Chris Pratt
it's
and
very
well
well
delivered.
timed. It's
Where
not
it's like,
like drawn out or anything.
no, and it's like how a person would actually use it in real life, just
Mhm.
like in the moment frustration and annoyance. And but at the same time as that, like I don't know, when you have a film that a lot of kids are gonna see, like I don't like a lot of swearing in movies kids can watch, but that's just me. I mean, kids shouldn't be seeing this. I mean, like you were saying, tearing off the High Evolutionary's face. Yeah, I don't know if I would take a kid to go see like a kid younger than like 13 to
Yeah,
see this. Like that was like the big one to me where I was like, oh my God. Like
yeah.
I don't think there were kids in my audience, but I can hear some people were grossed out by that. And again, that's James Gunn going back to his early horror roots. Like that's normal for him, but that was gross.
It was, but I mean, I was fine with it personally. And as far as kids go, I mean, of course, you're gonna have newer kids watching this, but this franchise has been going on for almost 10 years now.
Mm,
And so the kids that grew up with that first movie, that they've grown up,
sure.
they can handle an F-bomb for sure, and maybe possibly someone getting their face peeled off. But yeah, no,
Yeah.
uh,
Well, I guess
yeah,
speaking of that, on that note, what did you think of the High Evolutionary?
I surprisingly love the High Evolutionary,
Okay.
and even though, and James Gunn has done this in all three movies, maybe less or so in the first one, where he takes like the generic stereotypical bad guy. He wants revenge, or he just wants things his way, and he wants things in his image. But like he actually makes them like interesting and somewhat compelling. Ronan's probably the most generic of the three, but he's still really fun to watch. Just maybe just because like things are so silly in the movie, and then you have this really serious villain, and of course Kurt Russell is Ego. He's fantastic in there. But the High Evolutionary, even though I don't think he's as well written as like villains like Ego or Thanos or other Marvel villains out there, he's one of my favorite Marvel villains just because like genuinely for the first time in one of these movies, he's actually like one of the like only Marvel villains where he's just a straight up bastard that I want to see like the heroes take down. And like you see like just he's obviously his big character flaw is just his growing impatience. And that's affected with his staff too, where they're all like they're just sick of his his bullshit at that point. So, and that's one of my favorite things that you never really get villains like that. I guess like Goblin and No Way Home is like the closest thing you get to that, where he's just like an evil bastard that did something terrible, and you just want to see justice from your heroes. And I felt like that simplicity. I was like, I like this a lot, and they do poke fun like at the fact that Star Wars, like, you're gonna tell me your sad backstory about like your parents never loved you or anything, and it just never happens. And it's he's really he feels like an old cartoon Disney villain, but like in the best ways possible, where you in this like really dark and kind of really gritty movie, and you see our characters not necessarily literally, but like you see how much they get torn apart, both emotionally and technically, physically, with like the animals and all of that. And you just really want to see like this guy get taken down. And this is the most I've felt that for like any Marvel movie. Is you just want to see, you really want to see your heroes triumph. You don't compare it to something like Malekith, where it's just like he just wants Infinity Stone to do what? I don't know. Let's kill him. That's it. That's the end. This, I feel like, even though it's relatively simple and kind of generic, I guess, but no, it just felt more impactful just because of what you see him do to Rocket, and how much you just want to see payback in the movie.
So I thought the performance was very good, but I did find the character to be a little same-ish to a lot of other MCU villains. A lot of these characters that want to create a new world, it's like they did that with Thanos. Like I'd like it if we did something else. Like I don't know. Like Ego was such a good villain in the second one, and the Guardians have a lot with Thanos. That to me, he was a bit of a step down from those guys. For me.
And again, I understand that it's like as far as the character goes, he's not like Zemo. I feel like Zemo's the most branched out villain you can ever get, where he's just a guy with a plan and you're not really going to get that with Marvel villains. It has to be like end of the world stakes. But it actually gets me caring about how the heroes overcome him, and that's why I thought his role in the movie I thought was really great.
I also did like Counter Earth quite a bit. I like the furry creatures. I mean, furry being the operative word here. I mean, we get a man in a panda costume. That was great.
Mm-hmm.
Nathan Fillion was in a lot more of the movie than I thought he would be. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to spoil his whole shtick in the movie, but everything with him was very funny.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I thought he killed Drax for a second. Like, that's actually something I'll say real quick. There's a couple moments where Drax is like nearly dead, and then he's just fine the next scene. Like, I do just want to point that out, that it happens a few times. Like, does he just heal really quickly?
And I mean, they do establish in the movie, they have like those med packs where they just kind of heal you instantly, which is very convenient.
Oh, yeah, you're right. They did establish that.
But it is very convenient. But I mean, this is space technology. I was fine with it.
Yeah. I mean, you're the big Guardians fan between the two of us. I mean, you make fun of me for liking Doctor Strange. I can make fun of you for liking Guardians. So you want to talk about the ending?
Sure, yeah.
I guess before we get to the credit scenes, there's the ending where the Guardians all split up, where it's kind of sad in the sense that they went through all this trouble to get Rocket back, and now they're just splitting up.
Mm-hmm.
And but it leads to a dance number, which at first glance you're like, what is this? This is like a Minions movie? Like, what is that?
I was thinking of that too. It's like this feels like an early mid 2000s kind of like just kids cartoon where they end up in a giant dance party. But it was,
to me, it's more. Well, I thought about it some more, but to me, it's more like Return of the Jedi. The ending.
Yeah, and that's kind of that like finality sense in this movie.
Yeah. So like seeing like, and the song is like Dog Days Are Over or whatever, and you know when I hear that song now, I just think of Drax dancing, and that just warms my heart.
It was very sweet. It was very sweet.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the after credit scenes.
Okay.
So the first one, there's the bit with the new Guardians during the credits, which I like that Groot had his big Groot head from the comics. Like, I don't know if we're going to see those guys as a team in the future or anything, because obviously Gunn is done. Gunn is done, baby. Gunn is done. But yeah, I thought that was a fine little moment. They brought back "Come and Get Your Love," which was nice. That got a big aw in the theater in my section. Like, but do you have any thoughts on that scene?
No, I actually really like that post-credit scene a lot. It was nice to see, you know, Guardians are still a thing, and I hope we don't see that lineup in the future. I kind of hope that's just it, and it's just kind of more symbolic. Like, we'll still always have our Guardians, even if it's not the same people all the time. But no, I like the lineup too. You got Kraglin and Adam Warlock, and it's fun to see all of them. And I don't necessarily need to see all these characters again, but it was like a nice little closure moment.
Sure. But let's talk about that after credits scene, because that was surprising.
Yeah.
So for context, lay it out to the people. What happens in this scene?
I guess further context. So yeah, at the end of the movie, before all the after credits, Peter decides to basically break up the Guardians because he wants to go back to Earth and check in on his grandfather, if he's even still alive. But he is, and he has his cameo in the second movie. But yeah, so he's still alive, and and the after credits scene. The grandfather's like reading a newspaper, and Star-Lord's eating cereal, and it's just kind of like this kind of mundane back and forth dialogue, and he's like,
what the hell were they talking about though?
I think it was like that, like, housekeeper or whatever, is like, you know, Star-Lord's like, I don't want to mow the lawn for her son. I think that was a dialogue.
Okay.
Because I work in a movie theater and I clean movie theaters, and so I do stick around for like post-credit scenes. So I've watched that post-credit scene like 20 times now. But
oh wow!
So they're talking. At least I think they are. I think they're talking about like that housekeeper, whoever that is, like her son not mowing the lawn and having Star-Lord to do it, and it's just that like back and forth exchange. But the real thing is that at the end it says Star-Lord will return.
The legendary Star-Lord.
The legendary Star-Lord will return.
So I could have sworn that even Chris Pratt was talking about how he was done. So liar. But it's one of those things, like, there are so many projects that are coming, and like, when will we get this? Like 5 years? Like, I mean, we teased fucking Charlize Theron at the end of Doctor Strange. Like, when in the hell are we going to see another Doctor Strange film? When are we seeing another Shang-Chi film? Like, there is so much that when they tease something new, like the 10 Rings will return. Okay? You know what I mean? Like, unless they say, like, coming summer 2025 or something, like, where it's, okay, it's coming soon. But I don't know, when they tease stuff like that, when it's stuff we don't know about, it's like, when's that happening? Like, that could be so far away.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, it's more of the sense is that there's already like this huge kind of closure feeling throughout like the rest of the movie and with the rest of the group. And to see that the one that kind of initiated that, oh, he's coming back, I don't know. I guess the audience liked it. They were like, oh, but my audience was. And I was like, I don't need to see more of him, honestly. I kind of like where
Your audience is more like shocked in a good way, whereas mine were like surprised and like confusion.
yeah, that's what happened.
Yeah. So like, I mean, Star-Lord, I'll say this real quick. I'll go on record and say Star-Lord's one of my favorite MCU characters. Like, I love that character, and I love, like, he's right up there with, like, Chris Evans, Steve Rogers, as far as I'm concerned. Like, I
Yeah.
hold him to that high standard. So, I mean, I guess it just depends, because, I mean, I'm always down. I'm just I'm more curious as to what they could do with Star-Lord now. But, I mean, unless it's, like, they announce Peyton Reed is doing a Star-Lord Disney Plus show, then that's when I'll kill myself. So we'll see. Like, or if he'll show up in like Captain America 4. It's like, what is this?
All the Hulk characters in there. But no, it's that's kind of the more disappointing thing is like I like where Star Wars character goes everything before that post-credit scene because he's very different this time around and like he's definitely more broken emotionally after losing Gamora and him not having that relationship with her again and he's a lot more like protective this time around of like everything he still has and he's more protective on like the vulnerability of human life like even when Gamora's threatening to kill everyone. He's kind of like, hey, no, let's not do that. But at the same time, he's also more vengeful for people that kind of get in the way of that. Mm-hmm. And I like that decision at the end where he's like, hey, listen, I got to check and do some things in my personal life. I need to see if my granddad's still okay. And I like that. So I don't really need to see more of, this character in the future because I feel like that's a good way to end his the character's journey. You don't literally need to see more of him because with all the characters, really, they've all grown so much throughout these movies, and it's not necessarily you don't really need to see more of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I guess "No Sleep Till Brooklyn" is officially Chris Pratt's theme song now.
It was in Mario, yeah.
Yeah, like I thought it was funny when that song was playing because to me that was more of a mainstream song than what is often featured in these films. Like I was like, the Beastie Boys, really? Okay, but then it occurred to me that I heard it in something recently, and I was just watching the movie, and then in a completely different scene, it suddenly dawned on me, oh, it was Mario. Do you have any final thoughts on Guardians 3?
Not too much. I think we kind of covered everything.
Yeah.
Again, I loved it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's my favorite of the three. I don't know if you're there yet. For me, this trilogy is kind of, especially after rewatching them all, it's progressively gotten better, I think. I think the first two are kind of on the same level. I like the second one slightly more just because the first one is a pretty busy movie. Like, a lot happens in that movie really quickly. And that kind of, like, quickness, which is kind of repeated in, like, the first act of this movie, editing-wise, where you have a lot of, like, quick cuts and things just kind of, like, go, and it's... That stuff is, technically, is kind of the more bothering point for the movie. But this one, I feel like is a real step up. And again, just as far as what we've gotten from Marvel lately and what our lineup lies for the future, this one is definitely just going to stick with me the most. And
sure. No.
It's because genuinely, like, the only thing I've gone back ever since Phase 4 started, the only thing I've gone back to rewatch actively is WandaVision. Like that's genuinely it. So everything else, it'd be shocking if I even gave something a second watch outside of that. So uh, it's going to stick with me more. And like I said, that closure element, and it genuinely feels like an ending for as far as seeing these characters again, or I guess most of them. Um, and yeah, I thought it was great and definitely recommend it.
I would recommend it too. And I will say this real quick about the Rotten Tomatoes score. I mean, right now it's floating. The critic score is floating around like the 82% range, whereas the audience score is like in the 90s. So I think this might be one of the rare instances where it's like the most accurate Rotten Tomatoes score for both sides, where it's like the movie's really good. I mean, if you like the Guardians movies already, you're gonna love this a lot. It's not like a situation where like the critics like hated the movie, the fans loved it, like fuck the critics, or it's vice versa.
Yeah.
But this one's an accurate depiction, I would say, for the Rotten Tomatoes score.
Yeah.
So I guess on that note, we can wrap this up. We talked a lot about Transformers 2, so we can wrap this up now. So Chris, where could people find you?
You could find me over on Instagram and Letterboxd.
And yeah, you can find me there as well. I'm also on the Twitter still, where Elon Musk is now stepping down as CEO.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's gonna be a handover in June, I believe. But you can also find my video editing work on the Amazing Spider Talk podcast on YouTube. So check that out. But thank you all so much for listening. Take care, everyone. Bye.